Welcome to the Zen Studies podcast. I'm Domio Berg. Thanks to new supporting members of the podcast, Patrick from Tillamook, Oregon, and Mark from Wauwatosa, Wisconsin. So this is one of my unscripted Q&A episodes where I answer questions submitted by listeners. And if you have a question, please go ahead and send it to me at zenstudiespodcast.com. So today we'll talk about what Kosho Uchiyama meant in his book, Opening the Hand of Thought, when he talked about settling as universal life. We'll also address, isn't the Zen emphasis on monastic practice and self-liberation at odds with the Bodhisattva vow to free all beings? And finally, what can we learn from practicing with other Buddhist traditions than our own? And is this recommended if we don't live near a Zen center? So first, Uchiyama Roshi's settling into universal life. Terence wrote, quote, "I'd be interested in your thoughts on what Kosho Uchiyama means when he talks about settling as universal life. I'm referring specifically to his description of the 4 Bodhisattva vows in Opening the Hand of Thought." End quote. So I'm going to share with you a couple paragraphs from the Uchiyama book that will set up this discussion. So this is Uchiyama. Quote, "We need to remind ourselves of the clear distinction between personal conditioned self and the universal original self. The personal self is what we usually think of as I. But if we peel away the skin of this individual conditioned self, we lay bare the original universal self. The personal self is always trying to fulfill its desires. This is the so-called karmic self. Human beings are born with brains, and we naturally have a tendency, or karma, that lead us to fabricate a maze of illusions in our minds. This is our individual self, but it's a big mistake to assume that this self is the whole self. The whole self appears when we strip away karmic illusions, and that means opening the hand of thought. This is original, universal self." So, end quote for a moment here. Just in his book, Uchiyama often essentially equates universal self with original self, or universal life with original self. So these are all kind of used interchangeably. So he goes on, quote, "In our life as personal self, universal self is not something to yearn for. It is the direction toward which we should aim. This is the meaning of vow. The first of the 4 Bodhisattva vows is, 'Sentient beings are innumerable. I vow to save them all.' This means to settle as universal life wherever that life naturally settles. The second vow is, 'Cravings are inexhaustible. I vow to extinguish them all.' This means refraining from being dragged around by one's thoughts. But as long as we are human beings, we're going to have a mind that fabricates illusions. And so we have to continuously study the Buddha Dharma to clarify the reality of ourself. This is the meaning of the third vow. Dharma teachings are limitless. I vow to learn them all. The fourth vow is, 'The Buddha way is endless. I vow to complete it.' With this, we vow to settle as the universal self." End quote. Settling as the universal self. Obviously, This is something that we are aiming to do in Zazen. Uchiyama talks about it a lot, but also at other times. Letting go of achieving, trying to attain, even trying to break through into some spiritual reality, but just settling as universal self. And I love that language because it suggests this is what we already are. If we just settle, we will find ourselves in it. Letting go of striving, activity, any self-centered efforts, including any effort to make our meditation any particular way or achieve anything spiritually. And then, Uchiyama says, the whole universal, original, true self appears. I guess you could think of it as these vows, these Bodhisattva vows, are impossible as individuals. But when we settle into this universal self, in a way, it's not a thing, and even talking about it encourages us to reify it, but when we settle into this true way of being, the universe just functions through us. So one way to describe compassion is the hand reaching for the pillow in the night. Very classic Buddhist description. Or the hand, you're not even awake, and the hand reaches for the pillow to, fluff it up under your head a little more. And it's not that the hand is being compassionate toward the head as if they are two separate things. It's just a very natural action that is moving toward benefit. So, there's a few things that are more discouraging and overwhelming than trying to save all sentient beings as if we are capable of that. It can be just very discouraging. And yet if we can settle, and this is hard, I'm not necessarily good at it. If we can settle into in this more of a flowing way of being, opportunities arise, and we are more generous. We see beings around us as not being separate from us, so it is very natural for us to move generously toward them. And when we settle like this, let's say it's Hongzhi writes, bright clarity appears before us. So similarly, there's not some great wisdom we are striving for or to beat down delusions somehow. But when we settle, these delusions tend to fall away and the real wisdom appears or arises. When we are settled in this way, Dharma gates call to us. It feels like natural growth, not something that we are trying to achieve. And we see in what way the Buddha way is complete in this moment. So I think Uchiyama said it pretty well, but that is my take on why he would describe settling as the universal self being essentially synonymous with trying to fulfill these Bodhisattva vows. So Matt wrote, this is about reconciling the Bodhisattva vow with monastic practice. So he wrote, quote, I have a question about the Bodhisattva vow to save all living beings and how it fits with the monastic tradition. I see the vow as a commitment to work for the good of others, for their liberation from suffering in all forms, and I understand it as an expression of interdependent origination and the lack of distinction between self and others. So why does the tradition emphasize the importance of monasticism? Isn't this turning away from the suffering of others in pursuit of personal liberation? In the Platform Sutra, Huineng articulates the vow as to save living beings within your own mind, and parses living beings as all the negative kinds of thoughts one can have. Is this way of understanding living beings the traditional one? This strikes me as undermining the true meaning of the Bodhisattva vow, but perhaps I am missing something. End quote. So let's see. Let's visit that section of the Platform Sutra that Matt refers to. So this is Huineng speaking, the sixth patriarch of Zen in China. And this is a translation by Red Pine. So Huineng says, "Good friends, as for, I vow to liberate all beings, no matter how numberless. It isn't we who do the liberating. Good friends, the beings in our minds all liberate themselves with their own natures in their own bodies. What does it mean? They liberate themselves with their own natures. The mistaken views and afflictions, the ignorance and delusions within their material bodies already possess the nature of original enlightenment. It is just this nature of original enlightenment that liberates them by means of right views. Once beings realize the prajna wisdom of right views, they rid themselves of ignorance and delusion, and each being liberates themselves. The mistaken are liberated by means of the truth. The deluded are liberated by means of awareness. The ignorant are liberated by means of wisdom. The bad are liberated by means of goodness. And the afflicted are liberated by means of enlightenment. Those who are liberated in this manner are truly liberated. As for the vow, I vow to end all afflictions, no matter how countless. This means to get rid of the delusions of your own mind. I vow to master all teachings, no matter how limitless. Means to study the true, unsurpassed Dharma. And I vow to complete the path to Buddhahood, no matter how unachievable. Means always to practice with humility, to respect all beings, to avoid attachments, to give rise to prajna awareness, and to put an end to delusions. Thus the attainment of Buddhahood through your own realization is the result of your vows." End quote. So it's interesting in this passage, even though it is talking about your own realization, and he says the beings in our minds all liberate themselves. I don't read it exactly as these beings in our minds are standing in for like our delusions, like the beings are our delusions, metaphors for thoughts or habits within us. I guess I saw it a little more as maybe pointing toward the fact that we can't ultimately liberate beings. They can only liberate themselves in this, in this lasting spiritual Buddhist sense. Bodhisattvas are well known to try to benefit beings in all ways, right? Like maybe somebody can't practice spiritually if they are starving, right? So we feed them. But ultimately, the goal is for them to facilitate them liberating themselves. Like no one can actually get inside our mind and liberate us. Beings liberate themselves. And then this sense that these beings are in our minds, reminds me of this other aspect of the teaching, this particularly from the Diamond Sutra, and this is also a Red Pine translation, where the Buddha says, Subhuti, those who would now set forth on the Bodhisattva path should think this thought. And though I thus liberate countless beings, not a single being is liberated. And why not? Subhuti, a bodhisattva to whom the conception of a being occurs cannot be called a bodhisattva. And why is that? Subhuti, no one can be called a bodhisattva who conceives of a being, a life, or a soul. And there is a sense in which this is so when we can completely surrender our mental map of reality, when we can perceive at this very moment along the independent dimension of reality, which has no dimension. It's just here, just this, just now. That all distinctions between beings, between anything, are just creations of our minds. So in this sense, there are no beings. And there is certainly no being right here who's going to roll up her sleeves and work very hard to help others. But I think this is why the Bodhisattva path is so emphasized in Mahayana Buddhism, including in Zen, a tradition where there's been a lot of monastic practice. And even if there's not a huge amount of emphasis on monastic practice in the sense that you have to become a monk if you're going to practice Zen, we incorporate a lot of monastic practices into our practices, even if we're lay people, including sesshin, going away for long residential retreats, really even including our zazen, right? Temporarily setting everything aside and sitting where it's quiet and setting aside all effort to figure anything out or do anything. There's a kind of a practice of removal and stillness, which is honored as being pivotal. There's a kind of removal and stillness which is honored as being pivotal to our introspection and liberation. So, we regularly emphasize, just like Huineng said, the attainment of Buddhahood through your own realization. And let's put this in real terms. I mean, I think it's very common for those of us practicing Chan and Zen and probably other forms of Buddhism as well to have some doubts whether we are doing monastic practice or we think we should be, or we long to be, or we really love the space of retreat, or we really love the space of zazen. And we kind of wonder, maybe are we hiding out? Are we stuck in emptiness, right? Just stuck in this view, nothing really exists. Are we using the Dharma as an excuse for inaction, for the difficulty of engaging in the world, of the emotional pain of being involved in the world? In a sense, this is, retiring into a certain kind of nirvana, as we say the Hinayana or small vehicle practitioners do, that they're only concerned with their own peace and salvation and leave others behind. And so that's the very definition of the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva doesn't do that, does not retire into nirvana, but continues to work for the sake of others and stay engaged in the world. So I think it's a very legitimate question we should ask ourselves. Are we hiding out? Are we seeking our own peace above all else? And if this is the case, no matter how hard we practice, it will be an obstacle. But on the other hand, running around in the world without doing the inner work will lead to exhaustion and discouragement, burnout, resentment, despair, and unfortunately, often not being very helpful after all. I have been involved with activism at times, and the thought occurred to me many times, wow, these folks could really use some practice. There's just, the ability to not take yourself so seriously, to question your own points of view, to take responsibility for your own reactions, all of the kinds of things that practice encourages in us is very helpful, actually, in engaged work. So I've heard it said that when we're looking to free all beings, we're looking to free all beings from ourselves. So this is, what Huineng is saying. The attainment of Buddhahood through your own realization is what is fulfilling these vows. So I think what's a good way to think of it is that there has to be a balance between engagement and our more introspective, monastic types of practices, or even better, you might say, kind of a dynamic tension. And most of us are going to divide our time and energy between engagement and introspection. And, we never know for sure that we have the right balance, and one kind of pushes against the other. And, I'm going to be going away to session not too long, and, the world is still going to hell in a handbasket, apparently. And am I just going to set that aside and completely forget about it for a complete week? Yeah, but I feel okay doing that because it is within the context of a life in which I am trying to be engaged and respond. And I know that break will only make me better able to respond. Will strengthen me, will give me more energy for it, will give me more wisdom as I engage. So then you still have the question of, professional monastics, if you will. And these are not actually that common in Zen, that somebody just remains in a cloistered monastery. But, maybe thinking even beyond Zen, there are professional monastics. If we think of it in terms of a mandala, right, as a mandala is a picture which is composed of parts, and the mandala represents a whole. So if the mandala is like the whole Sangha, the whole Dharma community, greater Dharma community in the world, we all have different places in that mandala, different roles to play. We don't all have to be fulfilling all of the roles. So I like to think that really dedicated monastics have a very important role to play. Not that we should all be doing that. We couldn't all be doing that. But they maintain temples and Zen centers and monasteries for us. They, sit a lot and do the super deep work. They, remind us of the absolute when we are kind of frantic about everything that's going on in the world. They can remind us of that independent dimension. They can demonstrate through their lives that everything is sufficient, just as it is, and happiness doesn't depend on worldly pleasures. And there's a way that even if someone is not directly engaged in society, that they are still part of that larger mandala. They are still part of society, perhaps even by the very fact of their removal. So I like to think that even the hermit monk in the mountains has a place. And I, for one, it does my heart good to know that there are hermit monks off in the mountains, even if I will never interact with them. So that brings us to the question of practicing with other traditions. So Simon wrote, quote, I moved recently from Ohio to Washington State. In Ohio, I practiced with a Zen group. Here in Washington, I have joined a Theravada Sangha. I've learned a huge amount of Buddhism in both of these traditions and Sanghas. They overlap in many ways, but also have their distinct characteristics. I'm curious to know whether you have practiced in other Buddhist traditions and how such experiences may have enhanced your own growth. And note, I'm not asking which is best. Rather, I'm intrigued to hear any insights of yours about how different Buddhist traditions can complement one another, especially as in this modern world, they can be readily accessed by practitioners. End quote. So I do have very limited experience. I discovered Soto Zen very quickly in my journey and have stuck with it ever since. But I have a little bit of experiences along the way. The very first Dharma center I actually showed up in was a Pure Land temple. I only once, and then I heard them mention Zen, and I went home and looked up Zen in the phone book. I have practiced Soto Zen, as you know. I have been exposed to some koan work, kind of within the context of Soto Zen practice. I did take a class at my Tripa College here in Portland, Oregon, which is a Vajrayana lineage school, and attended a retreat out at Great Vow Zen Monastery led by a Theravadan monk. So the whole retreat was done kind of in the Theravadan style. I have students who have practiced Theravadan Buddhism before and Vajrayana Buddhism before. And I've also gotten to know other Chan and Zen teachers in my role as a teacher and priest. So I go to conferences and, I get to know other teachers. So I get somewhat familiar with their approach. So for me, these different tastes of different kinds of Buddhism have felt a little bit like very, very limited foreign travel that helps me question my assumptions, about my own kind of like home country or home culture. Humility about what seems sometimes like the arbitrary nature of our teachings and practices. And it's easy to get very kind of dogmatic and serious about our own teachings and practices. And then when you see, here's another form of Buddhism that does things completely differently, like, oh, okay. It's not, they're not absolutes. And all of this foreign travel, though, generally makes me happy to get home. I appreciate home Soto Zen even more. But I do get to see it through new eyes as well, just like travel. But just to be helpful, perhaps, these are my impressions of some different traditions of Buddhism, kind of how they differ and some things that they've taught me. And perhaps anyone else who is listening to this episode might want to write in via the website and let us know, if you've practiced in more than one tradition, can you, kind of help us answer Simon's question about how has that enhanced your growth to have practiced more than one type of Buddhism, or what have they given you? So here are some of my impressions. So in Pure Land Buddhism, which it's a very brief and surface explanation, is a devotional form of Buddhism where It's believed that practice is very difficult in this lifetime, in this world, and I think most of us would agree with that anyway. And that the Buddha, Amida Buddha, made a vow, a past Buddha made a vow to create a heaven realm where we, if we're properly devotional, we can be reborn and where practice will be easier. So we'll still have to practice. We still have to, do the whole path, but through our active devotions in this life, we can be reborn in that Western paradise and practice. And so the real focus of Pure Land Buddhism becomes how you live your life in this world. They do not generally have the same kind of clergy. They don't have monastics. Even their clergy are very engaged, have families. So the emphasis is really on your devotion and on your faith. And what it taught me, I think, is that, as they say, apparently in Asia, that practice can be seen as a tunnel with two ends, with self-power on one end and other power on the other end. And so if you enter through other power in Pure Land and in, praying to Amida Buddha, that eventually, you have to do things within your own power to change your life. And if you enter through a path like Zen, which is very much self-power, but you actually have to come out with a sense of other power. And I don't think this is a sense of other power and that we have to project and reify a power outside of ourselves, but just recognizing that the small, limited self is not going to be able to do this on its own. And then there's Rinzai Zen, and I've often thought it would be interesting to have a long conversation with a Rinzai teacher, on the podcast about, the strengths and weaknesses of both and how they complement each other. I really do think Rinzai and Soto complement each other a lot. Rinzai tends to be more focused on realization, on awakening, and it invites you to give it your all, to engage as deeply and energetically as you want. Give it everything. And it usually involves engagement with a teacher over koans. I think there's room in modern sanghas for not doing that, but that is certainly going to be something people are doing. Rinzai can sometimes seem rather austere, maybe sometimes competitive, but a good teacher or sangha can balance these tendencies with sincerity and respect and a sense of community. And what Rinzai Zen has taught me is that there really is something to awaken to, and that we should practice as if our hair is on fire. And then there's Vajrayana, or Tibetan Buddhism. Now, there's different kinds of Vajrayana Buddhism. I'm not familiar with any of them except for Tibetan Buddhism, and not very familiar. But I guess the first thing that springs to mind when I think of Vajrayana Buddhism is, wowee. Tibetan Buddhism is colorful, just really colorful. There is a sense of the importance of the guru, which is a teacher, to have a relationship with a teacher in which it's not a culty kind of thing, or ideally it's not, where this guru is going to be telling you what to do with your money and your life or something like that. It's more a matter of, again, it's not my practice, but you are seeing the Buddha manifest in the guru, and you are relating to that, right? It's kind of a faith, putting your faith in this person so that you can transcend yourself in a way that more kind of self-power focused practice can be difficult to, transcend yourself because you're so wrapped up in yourself and your effort. So Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism, it's actually can be very scholarly. There's a lot of text and a lot of philosophy, and has a very methodical approach to practice. And you can end up with a very clear path of practice and study. This is what you do now, and this is what you do next. And so if you like that kind of thing, there's going to be plenty of that in there. It also has a more of a sense of, there's the boundary between the scientific worldview of the kind of the world of appearances and the kind of realm of maybe spirits or deities or energies. The line between those two is more blurred. And what I think I've learned from Vajrayana Tibetan teachings and practices is that it's really, of all of these, the best tradition for incorporating all energies, kind of radical non-duality, seeing not even just like in Zen where we just try to see there is no difference. It's almost like Vajrayana asks you to actively seek out and incorporate energies and things that you might tend to want to reject, and to see them all as part of enlightened mind. So I don't know if that was a fair impression or not, but there you go. Then we have Theravada, where the teachings are all very rational and down to earth, and I talk about them a lot on the podcast in the Pali Canon. I was surprised, and this may not be universally true, but I think it's pretty common that Theravadan lineages, traditional Theravadan lineages, actually involve a lot of devotion towards Shakyamuni Buddha as a nearly perfect, almost omniscient being. A lot of devotion toward tradition. I mean, it is called the Way of the Elders, after all. And a lot of devotion toward the Pali Canon and what was said by the Buddha. So the Pali Canon carries kind of a similar weight for Theravadins as, religious texts like the Bible carries for Christians, or the Quran carries for Muslims. And Theravada also includes a lot of devotion for monastics and the monastic path. So there's kind of a sense that if you really want to practice, then you would do monastic practice. And what it has taught me, is many, many things. I absolutely love and depend on the Pali Canon and the core Buddhist teachings. Now, Vipassana is a modern development of Theravada, and will usually include the rational teachings and practices, and very little of that devotion stuff that I was just talking about the devotion to tradition, devotion to the Pali Canon, monasticism, Shakyamuni. And I don't know, in a way you could say that Vipassana is some of the best of Buddhism packaged for modern Westerners. But what is taught me is that Buddhist teachings and tools can be immensely useful to people in all walks of life, and we need not insist on people adopting a religious tradition in order to avail themselves of those tools. And then, just to come back around to my favorite, Soto Zen, some lineages use koans, but not usually systematically. The emphasis is on shikantaza, or the themeless sitting, on practice and enlightenment being one, on koans arising in everyday life. It doesn't involve generally striving for realization or for anything else. But it also may not give you much to sink your teeth into. It demands patience and dedication over many years, sometimes, to see results. I mean, usually some results right away, hopefully encourage you to stick around, but the real, like, the what you might be hoping for, the transformation of yourself or realization, it takes a while. It's like the very koan of Soto Zen is this non-grasping and this sense of, as I said earlier, settling into your universal self. And there's often more emphasis in Soto Zen on Sangha, on that building that relationship of Sangha, the community, and the moral precepts. And what it's taught me, amongst many things, of course, is a radical non-duality. The insistence that it is never apart from this very place. So on a related note, Dylan wrote, quote, "Would it be beneficial to join a non-Zen Sangha if my interest is Zen? Right now, life doesn't really allow for a Zen Sangha in my life, but there is a Tibetan center nearby I could attend." End quote. So as I have been discussing, different forms of Buddhism, even different lineages within one tradition, even different temples or Dharma centers within one lineage can be very different. It can be difficult to see what they even have in common sometimes. I mean, I guess if I had to sum up what they all share in common is just the, foundational teaching that your experience of life depends largely on the state of your own mind, and there are many things you can do to influence your state of mind. So the only thing to do is to just try a place and see if it's somewhere you can imagine yourself. Whether there's a sufficient amount of trust, sufficient affinity, maybe try it a few times. And don't despair if you don't resonate with a place. You could try a different one if there's one available. It's extremely valuable to practice in 3 dimensions with others. So I encourage everyone to see if there's any kind of Buddhist or meditation group near you that you can join in, at least on occasion. So what many people do now is some kind of participation like that. And if the group that you're participating with isn't exactly, that your heart really does call to Zen, or it's called to Zen, or it's called to a particular lineage or a particular teacher or something, if they are accessible online, like my group is, then you can participate online, get your Zen, but then also participate in 3 dimensions in order to do that practice. So that's it for today. I will try to get back before the end of the month with another episode. I hope you tune in. Thanks for listening.